Well, ladies and gentlemen, the president has spoken again with respect to operations going on in Iran. And so here's what we're going to do. If you didn't get a chance to see the president's speech and then Pete Hegseth and then the general and the Q&A and all that, we're going to summarize it all for you in about 5 minutes. And then we're going to go in the discussion about what the president has been threatening to do to Iran, specifically going after their entire power grid, infrastructure, extra pretty serious stuff. There's a deadline Tuesday at 8 p.m. He threatened on Easter that he would turn Iran into a living hell if they did not open up the Straits of Hormuz. Now, there's been some negotiations going on from Pakistan, but so far, nothing that actually has caused the deadline to be shifted. So as of right now, 8 p.m. tomorrow night, we're going to unleash all holy hell on Iran. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. And we're going to talk about what does it potentially achieve, if anything. All right, that's what we're going to discuss today, because the bottom line is that at some point here fairly quickly, when you consider things like the War Powers Act and the midterms and $4 gasoline and the fact that foreign militaries don't beat the United States military, foreign militaries convince the American voter that the war is not worth fighting. Many American voters are already there. They were there before this was even launched, right? But that's what the timeline is. That is what is going to decide what happens next. So we will take a look at the potential strategy on what sort of infrastructure Trump could go after, what we think the Ayatollah's response is going to be to that. And we're going to talk about kind of best case scenario, worst case scenario. Now, for the purposes here, this is analysis, right? This is analysis. We're not going to dig in a whole lot into, pro-war, anti-war, anything like that. We're just going to look at the situation as we find it. And what do we think is most likely to happen based off of the information that we have? I'm going to use some of my information from serving in combat and serving in Army Special Forces, counterinsurgency, unconventional warfare, counterterrorism. That was kind of my thing. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the insight that gives me. But we'll just have to see what happens. So first things first, I need to introduce, of course, my co-host who's going to be on with us today, Christian Hines, the Oracle of Virginia. Christian, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you?
By the way, everybody, if you've not gone over and Christian now has his own channel. His very first video is doing incredibly well because he did a great job on it. Go over and follow. Christian, where can people follow you on YouTube?
I suppose you just type in my name, or better yet, you can type in Freerin and the politics of deception, and you'll.
Oh my God. He just had to add anime. He just had to add anime.
I'm shocked at how well it's done.
It was good.
I give you credit for it, although I will say that the anime community on YouTube is behind it. I saw somebody I saw a VTuber do a reaction to it yesterday, which was kind of funny.
Well, first, let me give everyone the update. So essentially what happened is President Trump comes out. He praises the historic rescue of the downed F-15 airmen and weapons officers. So they got the airmen pretty quickly. The airmen took a little bit more time. We'll talk about that. But this was something like 155 aircraft, 4 bombers, 64 fighters, 48 tankers, 13 rescue aircraft. I mean, it was significant. It was a major achievement. Another demonstration of an outstanding executed special ops mission. President Trump also reaffirmed the Tuesday 8 p.m. deadline. So Iran is either going to allow the Straits of Hormuz to open, or he's going after their power plant. He called it power plant day and bridge day and all that. So he's going to go after strategic infrastructure. After he was on, CIA Director John Ratcliffe got on and he talked a little bit about how the CIA worked in conjunction with the Department of War in order to launch the operation. Pete Hegseth got after that along with General Dan Kane. They also talked about, they talked about the things they could talk about. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on what happened. We got a really good graphic that also explains it all. And then they went into the Q&A period. So, I mean, that was it. Look, it was, if you've ever seen Trump do a press conference with respect to a military operation, you know what to expect, right? It was beautiful. It was great. It was incredible. Many say it was the best. It was the best operation. Everyone says they've seen nothing like it before, right? So there was a lot of that. But to give you an idea of just, how significant this really was, I'm going to go ahead and bring up this graphic that was done, because I thought this, out of all the ones I've seen so far, I was pretty impressed with this one. And this comes from Indeed TV. And this is Operation Epic Fury in the Zagros Mountains CSAR operation. CSAR stands for Combat Search and Rescue. So to give you kind of a recap of that, right? So April 3rd, an F-15 Eagle shot down. It's hit by an Iranian SAM, that's surface-to-air missile, during strikes in southwestern Iran. Both the pilot and the weapons service officer, the colonel, are ejected safely, but they land in separate rugged mountains, because it's important to understand that even though you eject at the same time, right, that thing is still going. And if there's even a little bit of difference in when you both eject, you could end up miles apart. So the IRGC, they know that the plane goes down. They launch a manhunt. Plus, they also put out a significant bounty because they're trying to incentivize other people to help find these pilots. So that's April 3rd. Now, April 3rd, the same day, the pilot is rescued, right? A quick CSAR response with HH-60 Whiskey's Jolly Green Helos, A-10 support, recovered the pilot under fire. One A-10 was damaged, but the crew was safe, and the pilot was extracted successfully within hours. So there was a really, really quick CSAR operation that rescued the pilot. Now, the other guy, the weapons, the WSO, he was farther away, and they didn't know where he was right away. And so there was actually kind of a really cool story about this guy. Finally, he evades. He follows his SEER training. SEER stands for survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. A lot of pilots go through SEER training. Green Berets go through SEER training. There's other elements to go through as well. SEER training was some of the best training I ever went through. It was very good, very realistic. Yeah. Anyways, you actually have to sign an NDA to not talk about what happens in SEER training. It's the military's version of Fight Club. But he gets away. He's injured, right? He uses SEER training to hike about 7,000 feet to a ridge line with limited comms, turns on his beacon, and apparently the first thing he basically sent out was "God is good," which was pretty cool. And at that point, you had a couple things that were going on, because IRGC is looking for these guys. They put out the bounty. He's wounded, right? And he's in very, very rugged terrain. So the CIA actually starts a deception operation, and they're kind of sending out mixed signals to IRGC. So they're searching in the wrong place, right? If you remember the Indiana Jones thing. So that's going on as he's evading capture. April 4th and 5th, this is when the rescue buildup starts. So the U.S. establishes a temporary FARP. A FARP is a forward arming and refueling point. And what they're doing at that point is they're establishing kind of like a base of operations in Iran in order to go get this guy. And at that point, they say Elite Special Operations Forces. Now, people have said Delta, they said Green Berets, they said DevGru. DevGru is SEAL Team 6. I don't know who all was a part of the actual on-the-ground operations. 160 is SOAR. Those are the same guys. That's the Special Operations pilots for the helicopters. They fly the Little Birds, Blackhawks, Chinooks, etc. They are the same pilots that launched the operation for Maduro, or the same unit. And then they have various airports staged. So basically, they're going to go into this place, and their whole objective is to get gunfighters and air power in between wherever this downed pilot is, right, and the bad guys, and then just start jacking them up. So that's what they do. And then the night of April 4th and 5th, special ops are inserted in our darkness. They engage with the IRGC. They kill some of them in a firefight. They use drone strikes and roadblocks, and then they secure the wounded WSO and exfiltrate back to the FARP. Some U.S. aircraft were damaged, but no U.S. fatalities. And by April 5th, it's mission complete. Both crew members are safe. Again, I'm going to say right now, this was an absolutely epic demonstration of U.S. soft capability. You would be very, very hard pressed. The only other units in the world that could probably be capable of something like this would be like your British SAS or your Australian SAS. That's not to say that there aren't other good special operations units out there, but that level of training is unique. The other thing too is though the SAS might be good enough to conduct that, they would never have the corresponding logistical assets and air support assets to be able to pull it off, at least not nowadays. So when Trump says this really is a historic operation and a great demonstration of U.S. military capability, he's not lying. He's not exaggerating. This is incredibly. You would have expected more casualties on something like this. And then you even had some people questioning, like, why would you go to all this trouble? Because obviously this is a huge risk, because what happens if you end up losing a bunch of guys to go get the two down pilots? And at that point, it's one pilot. So why do you spend all this time, all this money, all this effort to go get one down pilot? Because he's ours. That's why. I saw this great post on X from somebody where he was quoting a foreigner, basically mocking the United States for the amount of time, money, and effort and risk we took to go rescue this pilot. And he quote tweeted him and he goes, "This is another example of this is what explains why a piece of paper doesn't make you an American citizen." Because Americans intuitively understand that's why, because we bring our people home. That's why. And again, really, really well done. And I could not be more impressed with what they did and how they did it. Now, this is the point of the show where I also wanted to talk to you about our partners over at Lear Capital, because as we've said before, whenever there's a lot of craziness going on in the world, all of a sudden stock portfolios start to, they start to get a little bit unpredictable. We'll put it that way. And the bottom line is that pretty much every economy on the planet is tied to the world's reserve currency, which is the dollar. But it's also tied to central banks all over the world. And what do central banks like to do? What do governments like to do when they can't tax you or borrow anymore? They like to print money. And when you print a lot of money, all of a sudden, strangely enough, the price of things like gold and silver tends to go up significantly. Why is that? Because you can't print gold or silver, and because it's actually stood the test of time. Now, if you want to learn more about how you can physically own gold and silver, that means physically in your possession, at your home, in your safe, not somebody else's bank, Lear Capital can teach you how to do that. If you want to make gold and silver a part of your 401k, of your IRA, they can also teach you how to do that. And it costs you nothing to call them up and get a free information packet. So you can go over to Lear Capital right now. You can call 800-707-4575. That's 800-707-4575. Or you can visit nick4lear.com. That's Nick, the number 4lear.com. Get that free information kit and just see what you think. By the way, you might actually qualify for up to $20,000 in bonus metals, right, with a qualified purchase. So call them up, go check out their website, see what information you get. Never hurts to be informed. Okay, so we're all happy that our pilots are home. We're all very, very impressed. This was an incredible special operations mission that was highly successful. But none of that changes the fact that we still got an 8 p.m. deadline coming up. And if that 8 p.m. deadline is crossed, well, then presumably Trump is about to really go after the infrastructure in Iran in a way that we haven't to this point. And there's been a lot of questions about, well, isn't this going to piss off the population? Aren't you hurting the very people you claim to be caring about? Is this a war crime? Like, all of those questions are going right now. Not to mention the question of, is he actually going to do it? Or is this going to be one deadline after the next? Because a lot of people have pointed out, or a lot of people have suggested, the president's been all over the place with respect to what his objectives are and with what he proposes to do. Now, I want to make one correction here. When we talk about the president's objectives, he's actually been pretty clear from when the operation was launched to when he did the update about 6 days ago to right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over like what were the actual things that he said he wanted to achieve with this. We'll do like a status update on where they're actually at, and we'll just ask the question, okay, has he done a pretty good job of sticking to the mission? So originally there was about like 5 objectives, right? It was destroy Iran's ballistic missiles and raise its missile production, right? So get rid of its production capacity. And that's been largely achieved or nearing completion, right? There's been a lot of degradation degradation of their ability. Not to mention the fact, you can kind of see this right here where it talks about as of March 10th, missile attacks were down 90% and one-way drones were down 83%. Right. So when it comes about their ballistic missile capability, their drone capability, they're running way low on stockpiles, and they don't seem to have the manufacturing capacity to be able to make more of them. And again, that's not just impacting us in Iran, that's also impacting Russia at this point. 2, it was annihilate and destroy Iran's Navy. And you could also say going after their Air Force as well, because your naval power and your air power gives you the ability to project power. And they wanted to be able to diminish that. Now, again, as of, from March 10th, there was 50 naval ships hit. By March 19th, it was 120 vessels, including 44 mine layers attacked, and strikes were moving deeper inland. There's no question right now when Pete Hegseth brags about this idea that we've decided to share the ocean with the Iranians, they get the bottom half. they've made good on that. So I would say that the first one has been largely achieved. The second one, that's been achieved. Their Air Force doesn't exist anymore in any practical sense. And their Navy, with the exception of like little speedboats and things like that, they just don't have the ability to project any power from a naval perspective. There was also ensuring Iran never obtains or gets close to a nuclear weapon. Okay, here's the one where I get a little bit more skeptical of this as an objective. Because when you say they can never attain it, what do you mean by that, right? Never is a freaking long time. Now, if you mean that, if you would have said we're gonna completely eliminate their ability to have a nuclear weapons program for the next several years or whatnot, that's a little bit more achievable. But people would have come back and looked at you and said, well, wait a second, didn't you already do that back in June? And the argument there is that, well, they went after a particular facility and they did do significant damage to that facility, but there was already a certain stockpile of enriched uranium that the Iranians had. And so the question is, okay, is us taking out this facility going to cause them to say, we give in, we're not going to do this anymore? And the intel suggested that no, they are. Now, there's a lot of fights over that, right? Joe Kent says there's no intel to suggest that they were actually pursuing a nuclear weapon. But then you have other sources within the CIA saying that's not true, or that's a misrepresentation of the facts. The bottom line is none of us are going to know this for sure. Anybody that is getting out there and claiming to have all the intel on this is probably lying to you about the depth and breadth of their access to knowledge and information. Presumably the only person that could, I'll put it this way, the only person that could step forward right now and say, I'm sorry, but there really is no intel suggesting that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. If Tulsi Gabbard got out and said that, I would be like, she's in the best position to have access to the sorts of information that would give her some authority to say that in a way that I would say is really believable. Joe Kent was the head of the center, the counterterrorism center, and that's a significant position, but that doesn't mean you have access to all the intel on Iran's nuclear program, right? That's just not a thing. But by the same token, it has been significantly degraded, right? So there's no question. If Trump were to walk away right now and say their nuclear program is basically in the Stone Age for the next few years, okay, that might be true. But then the question is going to be, where's the enriched uranium they already have, and what's the probability that they now get assistance from a place like China or North Korea that could help them expedite that process? Because there's no question, and this has been brought up before, that, well, look, every time you attack Iran with impunity, it convinces Iran that they need a nuclear weapon. Now, my response to that is Iran already thought they needed a nuclear weapon. Us attacking them it may be more evidence, but they already had sufficient evidence in their mind to want to have one. Number 4 was stop Iran from arming, funding, and directing terrorist proxies. So some of their most prominent proxies are the Houthis in Yemen, it's Hamas in Gaza, and it's Hezbollah in Lebanon. And there's no question that they have not been able to support those organizations with the same amount of funding, support, training that they were in the past. The IRGC and the Quds Force was the primary element that was responsible for assisting those proxy elements. And there's again, they don't have a lot of time to be assisting proxies right now because they've been so severely degraded. So the thing is that yes, that has been achieved, but it's the whole question of how long can you sustain that? Like, how long can that be? Is it realistic to assume that they will not do that? And then five was the broader goal of eliminate imminent threats from the regime, degrade defense industrial base, which again, there's been a lot of progress on that. It's hard to say, unlike certain things, it's one thing to say we want to sink their Navy. We can check to see whether or not that was done. When you say eliminate imminent threats from the regime or degrade their defense industrial base, you can certainly do that. We've definitely degraded their industrial base. But if you completely removed any imminent threats, I don't know. That's a little bit harder to say. You can only know so much on that one. But as you can see, right, by March 31, 11,000 targets struck, first overland B-52 missions begun. And with the exception of this one F-18E and then an A-10, and A-10s are, for those of you who don't know, A-10s are specifically created for close air support, right? So they're more low flying. It's basically a titanium tub and a machine gun with a plane built around it, right? If you're a ground force guy, you love the A-10 because when the A-10 starts showing up and going Bert, like it is a lot of death all at once. That thing pink mists on an industrial scale. It's pretty incredible. But the idea that we've flown as many thousands of sorties, well over 10,000 attacks, not all of that directly by air power, but thousands of sorties. And the fact that we've only had 2 planes taken down by enemy fire at this point just demonstrates complete air dominance. And it's again, I pointed this out before, but I want to say it again. This is one of the reasons why, even though you had a significant power differential between the Russians and the Ukrainians, right? Defense tends to have the advantage, which is why you want 3-to-1 odds when you're attacking. Defense tends to have the advantage unless you have air superiority. Now, and at that point, you can launch, more wide sweeping attacks. The problem right now is defensive technology, anti-tank weaponry, things like that has all advanced significantly, and Russia's never been able to maintain air superiority. You can see the difference in what you're able to achieve when you do get air superiority, or in this case, complete air dominance. Now, all of that to say, there's a couple things that are interesting, and then we're going to go into the attacks, which could start happening at 8:01 p.m. On Tuesday. Looking at the various countries who are allied with Iran and allied with the United States, we also get an interesting picture on how this is impacting people. So the 3 strongest allies of Iran are Russia, China, North Korea. Russia is a major purchaser of Iranian drones. China gets about 11%, or has gotten historically about 11% of their imported oil from Iran. So it's an important partner for them as well. And then North Korea, there's support there. It's not like North Korea has a lot to offer, but they do have nuclear weapons, right? So there is assistance they could potentially play there. Now, what's interesting in all of these is, while all of these countries have come out and condemned the United States and Israel, blah, 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 Russia's not really in a position to help much, right? They were going to start selling Iran some more advanced aircraft and things like that. But it's not like Russia is shipping down weapons and munitions. There's probably back channel stuff going on, but nothing significant going to Iran as a result of this. So Russia may be allied with Iran. Iran supplied Russia with a lot of equipment, but Russia doesn't seem to be reciprocating at this point. China's in a position right now where there doesn't seem to be any military or weapons support that we know of. There doesn't seem to be...
Actually, on that, Nick, we do know that the Chinese have recently sent the Iranians chemicals that are used in the production of ballistic missiles.
Okay. Since everything has started?
Yeah. I mean, this was recent. This was in the last week.
Okay. So that's new. Days. Yeah. So
it's not like they've been sending weapons straight up, but they have definitely been sending chemical compounds that are used in making missiles.
And there has been some limited economic support as well. But again, China, with respect to what China could do and what they are doing, it's clear that China doesn't really want to be involved in this is when the U.S. has got major air power in play and is involved. And again, the answer is, or the question is, why, right? If China is every bit as powerful as they are made out to be from a military standpoint, why would they not help their ally? And understand, China gets about 11% of their imported oil from Iran. They represent about 80 to 85% of oil purchases. So they are a more closely knit strategic ally. And I think the answer is pretty simple. It's, well, yeah, it would suck for China to lose the 11% of their imported oil there. They can probably find that other places, even if they got to pay more. But one of the things that is on display right now is overwhelming American military power. This is the part where I always tell everybody, yes, it doesn't mean the United States can get away with whatever they want. It doesn't mean that the United States can affect regime change the way we would like every single time. But when it comes to pitched battles, when it comes to force projection, we're king, and nobody comes close, to include the Chinese. And they know it. It doesn't make sense for them to get involved in this at a point where it could raise tensions with the United States, where their own military equipment might be proven to not be very effective, where it would cost them money to do it, where the United States could potentially launch sanctions in other areas, right? So this doesn't make sense. But you know what does make sense for China? Allowing the United States to continue to get drug into something that they think more likely than not is going to be harmful for the U.S., right? So China can actually kind of sit back and be like, hey, Iran, buddy, here's some money, here's some, fuel or whatever. But they don't got to do much more. And then North Korea really just doesn't possess the capability to do much more. But when it comes to NATO, the three NATO allies that have been probably the biggest disappointment for the United States right now have been Spain, Italy, and France, which, I mean, Spain's, let's face it, man. Spain has kind of made their decision. They're going full commie right now. They have an administration that gave legal status to 500,000 illegal immigrants that were in the country. They've just kind of made their choice, and it's not with the United States. France, I mean, at what point are we going to stop being surprised with France, always kind of like, I don't know, just letting us down, right? It just kind of is what it is. And then Italy was a little bit more of a surprise for me because there has been warm relations between Meloni and Trump. But by the same token, a lot of these countries are angry about this because they feel like it's impacting their economy from an energy perspective far more than it is the United States. Not to mention the fact that all of these, you want to know what all these countries have in common? Really large Muslim populations that have come fairly recently. And so they're worried about what this potentially means for them and their own domestic populations. Nobody's going to convince me otherwise on that. So I think so what's interesting is none of Iran's strongest allies are really giving them a lot of support, but the United States is not really getting much support either, except of course from Israel, which also has their own interests within the region, especially when it comes to Iran. And then there's also been, support from Saudi Arabia, UAE, et cetera, because they've also suffered attacks as a result of this. And it's not just because of this. Iran is saber rattled against those countries for a long time because of what they want to do. So if Trump makes good on this, and Christian, this is where I need some of your analysis as well on this. If Trump, as he put it out on Truth Social, right, where he said Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day, all wrapped in one, Iran. And then he added, open the effing Strait, you crazy, or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. There's also been a lot of talk of them deploying troops, that could be used for ground operations, like in the island of Kark and others. Kark is the little island in the Persian Gulf there that handles about 90 to 95% of Iranian oil exports. It all gets kind of shipped over to that island, and then it gets loaded up on tankers there. And Iran, again, to date, has still been permitted to get some tankers out of the Strait of Hormuz. So that's the deadline. The deadline is do this by 8 p.m. on Tuesday, and if you don't, we're coming after you in a big way. And specifically, that's the power plants. Now, here's what I want to show everybody. This is Iran's main population centers. All right. So Tehran here, the capital, 9.6 million. Here's what I want to point out. We're going to do a juxtapose on where the population centers are and where the power plants and the various energy infrastructure is in the country. So as you can see, a lot more sparsely populated here in portions of the central and the southeast portion of the country. The areas which are typically most supportive of the regime, where the regime has the most loyalty, is right here in kind of the central area around Qom, Tehran, et cetera, kind of the areas that you would anticipate, right? This is where the strongest support is within the country. The area where you have the most opposition is up here in the Azerbaijani areas, the Kurdistan areas, the southwest where the Arab areas are. So these areas right here are the areas that probably have the least amount of support for the regime. So here in the west, and then over here in the southeast, right? These areas right here, you have less support for the regime. And that's kind of reflected when you look at the various protests that were going on. So if you look at the protests, this starts right here in late 2026. And as you kind of see how they develop, again, where are you seeing a lot of the protests? Well, you're seeing them over in this area. Later on, you get some more up in this area as well. You have some of these ones in Tehran. The red is low confidence. The green is high confidence. But again, you can see that even though this area is somewhat supportive, you also have a higher population center. So even though the area in general is more supportive of the regime, you still have populations, especially among the university and the student population, which were protesting in Tehran. Now, when you look at where the power plants are, this is where you got the power plants. So obviously you got a lot around here. This is Tehran area. These orange ones represent gas. These ones right here with the black represent oil. The yellow represents solar. The blue represents hydro, right? So this gives you kind of a good breakdown of where your energy generation is within the country, where your refineries are. And the reason why I bring this up is, like, if you're about to launch strikes, well, you probably don't want to take out the power centers in the area where you actually have opposition, your highest opposition to the regime. So if your highest opposition to the regime is in these areas right here, well, then it'd be fair to anticipate that those probably aren't going out on the first strike. You're going to focus around the ones that are in the areas, again, Tehran, Qom. You're going to focus on these areas right here where you're going to degrade you're going to degrade the power right around the centers that are most loyal to the regime, or that are most critical to the regime to be able to carry on operations. So these are the population centers that you might see most immediately impacted. But again, the problem is, you impact in one area, just because it's close by doesn't mean it doesn't impact other areas as well. And especially when you get into some of the hydropower, because if you end up going after dams, obviously there's a lot of collateral damage that can take place as a result. So if I had to guess, I think the ones you're going to see is going after the gas, some of the oil, to the extent that they, solar, probably not, because I don't think it generates. I mean, you can tell this doesn't generate anywhere near as much. You got 10 megawatts there versus 2,800 megawatts here, 954 megawatts. Most people are not going to be surprised at what gets hit first. And so I don't think that Trump's just going to go in and destroy everything in the country. I think they're going to look at population centers where there's, let's say, you're more likely to have a critical mass of the population that doesn't support the regime. I don't anticipate them getting hit as hard as the ones where you do have more popular support. So that gives you an idea of where we're probably going to see that. Now, the Iranians know this as well. So to the extent that they have surface to air missiles, which they clearly have some still left, right? They're going to concentrate in the areas which they think are most likely to be hit. The difference is that when you're looking at the sort of missions that are going to be launched for this, I just don't anticipate Iran's going to be able to do much about it. The big thing that they're going to probably try to do is a propaganda war to basically take the suffering that happens as a result of power going down and blame the Americans for that, and try to use that to turn the population that maybe is a little bit, maybe the elements of the population that are mad with the regime, maybe the ones that were more mad for economic reasons as opposed to social or religious ones, they will just basically blame the United States for causing the economic hardship. And that could theoretically be a message that would resonate with the population. Christian, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so that's a lot to take.
Yeah.
A couple things. First off, I don't really think that, especially after this operation where, we deployed all of these resources just to rescue one guy, and it was successful, right? I mean, we lost a couple of vehicles, but, somebody pointed out, like, oh, I can't believe you're calling this a success when you lost all of this. And, they showed like a picture of like the 3 types of planes. And somebody replied like, yes, I know that you as a European think that this is a big deal because that would be the equivalent of your entire Air Force. So I get, how you can look at that and conclude that, America's not going to be defeated militarily.
No.
But it doesn't mean that the war is going to end in a successful outcome in the way that Trump or large parts of his base want it to. I mean, there's a reason that there has been a minority of people on the right that have been opposed to this from the start, myself included. At no point have I supported this. I still don't support this. I think it's a mistake because you can blow up Iran all that you want, but what exactly is the exit ramp, right? How do you extricate yourself from this situation? You and I have been talking about this quite a lot over the last couple of days. And to me, it's clear that, yes, you can decimate their military. You can kill, almost half of their government within the first couple of days. You can blow up all these IRGC buildings. You can destroy their defense industrial base. You can even go after their infrastructure like Trump is threatening. But all that Iran really needs to do is have enough drones and enough missiles to continue to target defenseless oil tankers trying to make their way through the Strait of Hormuz in order to keep that shut down, keep oil prices over $100 a barrel, and then engage in relentless propaganda in the West and sow chaos around the region by continuing to strike places like Abu Dhabi and Dubai and stuff like that in order to effectively change public opinion and force the United States to back off. And it's not inconceivable that that could work, right? There's two separate types of wars being fought here. In some ways, it actually reminds me of Ukraine. In Ukraine, the situation is different. Both sides have different objectives, right? The Ukrainian military's objective is recover territory that the Russians have occupied since 2022. The Russian perspective is destroy the Ukrainian military. They have a secondary objective, which is occupy territory, but what they really care about is destroying the Ukrainian army, right? And those,
well, I mean, go on and finish your thought on that one.
Those two things are different goals because from the Russian perspective, they can fight a war of attrition, right? Because all they need to do is ground down the Ukrainian military and then they get what they want, which includes territory. But their strategic objective is actually not territory. Their strategic objective is the destruction of the Ukrainian army in the field. Whereas Ukraine's strategic objective is territory. So they're fighting two different things. This reminds me in a way of what's going on here with the Middle East, right? Both sides are fighting different conflicts. The United States' objectives are very different than Iran's objectives. For the United States, this is a war of choice, right? Like one of the objections that I see from other people on the right or in Europe is, we didn't tell the Europeans about this until we did it. Yeah. And it spiked oil prices for them. And now they're upset. And so now they're not willing to help us because they feel like they were left out and they're paying the cost for, the energy crisis and all of this stuff. Like, it is a war of choice on our part. Whereas the Iranian perspective, this is literally an existential struggle for survival.
Let's make a distinction. Let's make a distinction here. And this is one of the biggest problems that we get into whenever we get into conflicts in the Middle East. And people will look at something like Venezuela and be like, oh my gosh, that went off so well. Why? Entirely different culture, very, very different conditions, right? You might have widespread opposition to the Iranian regime within Iran. I believe that, right? The protests suggest that. The difference is that didn't mean that the IRGC were going to lay down their weapons, or the Ayatollah was going to, if you just got rid of the Ayatollah, the rest of the government just falls. You're talking about you're talking about a lot of religious fanaticism, combined with the fact that while the people protesting dislike the regime, that doesn't mean they actually have the capacity to fight an effective insurgency against the regime. So when Maduro went away, Trump basically struck a deal with the existing government over there. It's like, there is an off-ramp for you, or there's death. What would you like? And they're like, we'll take the off-ramp. We'll take the off-ramp. You were never going to get that same deal with the IRGC. I think, again, I maintain I don't have any special knowledge that so many people that podcast these days seem to. I don't have any vibes. Nobody came to me in a dream, right? I'm just saying it would make sense if the United States had been convinced that there were elements within the Iranian National Army, not the IRGC, the National Army, that were willing to defect. Because if you would have had a couple of brigade commanders, if you would have had a couple of large police forces that were willing to say, we're joining the rebels, well, now all of a sudden you've got territory, you've got an authority structure, you've got weapons, you've got potentially heavy equipment, and then the United States and the Israelis can provide the air power. And again, when you have air superiority, when you have air dominance, you don't need to outnumber them on the ground. If you outnumber them in the air, you can achieve a whole lot. That's a huge power differential. But that didn't materialize, right? There, to my knowledge, there were no significant Iranian National Army units that split off, or police forces or anything else. So what you're kind of left with is maybe some resistance fighters among the Kurds, because we've worked with the Kurds for a long time. So we have kind of our best relationship with them. You might have some Azerbaijanis, but that's a tenuous relationship as well. And then in the Southwest, with respect to the Arab populations, you might have people that don't particularly like the regime, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to band up and go fight. And so you don't have the proper conditions on the ground for successful regime change, unless you're willing to pour in, tons of troops and money. And even then, you probably only have you probably have the mechanism to affect regime change. And then as soon as you leave, it goes right back to being bad. So But here's the thing. And this is where I think the biggest thing that the Trump administration didn't pull off well on this was I don't think they didn't do a good enough job emphasizing what their 5 objectives were. Because the 5 objectives they laid out weren't bad objectives, and theoretically they're attainable on some level. Now, again, I don't like it when you say we're gonna fight until they never can produce a nuclear weapon. Okay, well, forget it, because unless you get rid of the Ayatollah, they're going to continue to pursue a nuclear weapon. Unless you get rid of the Islamic Republic and return to the Shah or something else, you're going to get that. So that wasn't a well-articulated objective, in my opinion. But some of the other ones: degrade their Navy, degrade their Air Force, stop their offensive capability, prevent them from being able to successfully support proxies. These are all things that I could have looked at and said, okay, I don't want another ground war in the Middle East. I don't want another nation-building exercise in the Middle East. But if you're telling me that you have the intel which suggests that you can target the right things in order to degrade these capabilities and demonstrate to our allies in the area, not just Israel, but like Saudi Arabia, UAE, et cetera, and you can stop Iran from destabilizing peace accords like the Abrahamic Accords by denying their ability to support the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah, I could have looked at that and said, what are you going to use? Well, we're going to use air power, we're going to use naval power, we're going to use special ops. I'd have been like, I can see supporting this. I can see supporting this. It's not a nation building exercise. You're not suggesting, that it's going to be US led regime change. Okay, great. I think the problem is that the moment Trump said to the Iranian people, this is your opportunity to take back your country, I heard that the way he intended, which is, this is your opportunity. We're not doing it for you. This is your opportunity. But a lot of other people said, here we go again. And that's understandable. That's totally understandable. While Americans would be like, not no, but hell no. So I think from a messaging perspective, if the Trump administration had been out there every day saying, here's our 5 objectives, here's our status update. Here's our 5 objectives, here's our status update, or whatever it was. And regime change was never mentioned as one of those objectives. It could have been a nice byproduct if the necessary conditions were there, right? But it was a byproduct, not our mission. I think the American people would have been a lot more prone to look at everybody like they did when they did the initial strike, right? When Tucker and Candace, oh my gosh, it's World War III, oh my, and they were talking about the Panicans, right? It made sense because it was 12 days with a very clear objective and we were out. This was not as clear an objective. They weren't as refined, and there wasn't, the more it goes on and the more it costs and the more oil goes up and gas goes up, the more people start to wonder what the heck we're doing. But that just leads us to the next question, which is, okay, if we just look at it on the ground, regardless of how you feel about it, what are the most likely ways that we extricate ourselves from this situation? And I brought up this article right now that I want to read, but first I want to get to a couple of the super chats here. So Ray Brott, thank you very much. Europeans mocking the U.S. spending money to save one guy should be a wake up call to all of their enlisted troops. Again, I've served with a lot of foreign militaries because that's one of the things Green Berets do is we train with a lot of foreign militaries. We train with a lot of indige population when we're conducting UW or COIN, which is unconventional warfare counterinsurgency. And again, most of your European militaries used to always kind of have that same mentality: is we don't leave people behind. Now, most European militaries have not engaged in ongoing combat operations, except maybe some limited stuff in like Africa or whatnot since World War II. So I don't know what the standpoint is of their military. I will say that there has been a major wokeification of a lot of European militaries. And, when it comes to leaving a man behind, I think you're absolutely right. When it's people mocking us for going to get our guys, that's a very, very important morale question for your own troops. Kevin says, demand that our NATO ally Turkey, neighbor of Iran, deploy their second largest military in NATO into Iran, or we will pour our U.S. military out of Turkey, impose high tariffs, banking sanctions, and visa bans. We can demand it all day long. They're not obligated by treaty to do it. They have no real incentive to do it at this point. They don't have the problem with Iran that we do. They actually have some common enemies when it comes to like the Kurds and the Israelis. And so we can demand it all day long. I don't think Turkey really, there were strategic reasons to add Turkey as a NATO ally. But at this point, again, NATO's grown so much. And again, why was NATO started? It was to combat the Soviets, right? So Turkey belonging to NATO at one point could have made sense, but at this point, it probably doesn't. In fact, there's a lot about NATO that probably doesn't stand up to reason right now. And we're seeing that within the fractures in the alliance.
The Turkish government doesn't even like the United States right now.
Yeah.
Erdogan's no friend of the U.S. They're not going to launch a land invasion of Iran. Like, they gain nothing from this, right?
No.
Their enemy right now is Kurdish separatists, and Turkey has terrible relations with Israel as well.
Yeah.
So
well, and let's be intellectually honest, right?
And
if you go and launch a military strike, which is going to significantly impact your allies more than you with respect to energy costs, and you don't tell them about it before you do it, and there's plenty of strategic reasons why you wouldn't tell some of our NATO allies before you launch this attack, you can't expect them to be super happy about it, right? Now, I think it's one thing for them to say, you're not allowed to use our airspace. It's one thing if they wanted to say, hey, look, U.S., this is you. We're not sending our troops. We're not sending our aircraft. We're not sending our munitions. If they wanted to say that, I'd been like, I get it. When they're like, you're not even allowed to use our airspace. Now I'm kind of like, you know what? Piss off. We spend so much more money in NATO, like orders of magnitude more than all of our NATO allies combined. And so it's this idea that we can't use your airspace, like piss off. But I get why certain countries like, we don't want to escalate this with you, right? I get why they would say that. Kevin came back again. Again, thank you for the super chat. We're going to get 2 more super chats here, and then we're going to get into some analysis on what's going to happen with this going. But Trump and Netanyahu should encourage a joint Kurdish and Azeri free the Kurdish and Azeri provinces of Iran with Israeli and U.S. air and special forces support. So,
weren't there rumors of that at the start of the conflict, that the Kurds in Iran would rise up against the regime, and it never happened? I mean,
yeah.
The Azerbaijanis don't like the Iranians, and there's a very large Azerbaijan. There's a whole Azerbaijani province in Iran, in the northwest part of the country. And Azerbaijan actually has they're kind of famous, maybe infamous, for being one of the only Islamic countries in the region to have very close ties with
Israel. Yeah,
they have a mutual enemy in the form of Iran. Azerbaijan and Iran do not get along with each other. The problem in a lot of this, the problem in a lot of this is. Azerbaijan brutalizes the Armenians all the time, right? They just finished mopping up Artsakh recently, basically ethnically cleansed the area. So that's created a bit of a, put it lightly, diplomatic problem with the United States in terms of coordinating with them, because we have a large Armenian population and a large Christian population that don't like that. But the other problem is, there does not seem to be sufficient organic support within the country. There's not fracturing of the elites within Iran to allow for a situation like that. And even if you had something like that, is it actually really in the U.S.'s best interest to like literally create a ethno-religious civil war in Iran?
Okay, this is the part where I'm going to push back, because it's the whole like, oh, we're destabilizing the region. Iran's whole mission is to destabilize the region in order to gain greater power for themselves. Right. It's not like Iran is some stabilizing force that we just got in a pissing contest with. Iran doesn't just threaten Israel. Right. They're unfortunately running roughshod over Iraq right now. But they threaten Saudi Arabia. They threaten UAE. They threaten other strategic partners within the Middle East. I'm sorry, nobody's going to sell me on, gosh, Iran would just be peaceful if it wasn't for the United States and having bases overseas. You want to know who's done the best job ever of actually destroying that argument? Is Raymond Ibrahim. I'm going to try to have him on the show here, but he's done a great job of saying there's the message that a lot of these countries put out to their Western audiences, and then there's what they actually say to each other. And if you look at what they say, like Al-Qaeda did this, like, oh, the only reason we're attacking America is because you're in the Holy Land and you're doing this and you're doing that. And if you would just leave us alone, then you write what they wrote to each other. And it's like, oh yeah, we hate all of them. They're infidels. It's global jihad, the whole deal. So like, I don't buy it that, do we have an interest in destabilizing Iran? When Iran is functioning at full bore, they destabilize everyone else. We got another super chat here from Angie. Said, Nick, what would your hardline stop point be? And here's what I would say. I want to caveat this. I do not want to see a nation building exercise in Iran led by the United States. I do not want to see that and what it would take to actually make that happen. Because I don't think, and the reason why is not because I don't want to see regime change in Iran, but it's like anything else. I'm an unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency guy. And when we look at an area for regime change, here's what we look at: conditions and catalysts. and the conditions that you want. When you look at the American Revolution, the French got in on our side. Why? Because the Continental Army beat the strongest, ground force at the time at Saratoga. We demonstrated that we could win battles, that we could hold terrain, that we could keep an army in the field. We could do all of these things, right? The Iranians are not demonstrating any of that right now, which means the conditions are not there for them to be able to mount and not even a successful overthrow of the regime, but to be even to hold territory, right? If there was like regular insurgent forces operating in Iran right now, where they went back into like the Kurdish provinces, or they went back into the Azeri province or whatever, if they went into those areas and they could base up, store, supply, and then go back out and hit targets again, it'd be like, okay, you got a base of operations that you relatively control that you can work from. That doesn't exist to my knowledge. To the extent that you have all of these protests, who's the leader? I don't know who that is, right? There was this famous quote that George W. Bush asked, "Where's the Iraqi Thomas Jefferson?" Well, what a stupid question, right? The French knew the answer to that question before they helped out, in our revolution. So you've actually got to know. And right now, people are saying, "Oh, it's the son of the Shah." Oh, you mean the guy that doesn't live in Iran, right? The guy that hasn't lived in Iran for decades? Again, maybe he would be a legitimate political figure that they could rally behind, but it's hard to do that when he's outside of the country, right? I'll give a perfect, to bring back Ukraine right now. Say whatever you want about Zelensky. Zelensky stayed and fought, and he earned a lot of respect from the Ukrainian people as a result. And I don't see any major leaders standing up in Iran. Now, maybe they're there and I just don't know. I am perfectly willing to admit that. But if I don't know, then I can't analyze, from a point of ignorance. And so that's why I would say my hardline stop is the moment this says, well, the only way to solve this problem and to meet our objectives is to go out there and, have a U.S.-led invasion. And that's how we're going to, I would look at it like your conditions are not there in order to achieve that objective. Not in that area. Sorry. Mana Yod said, to all the Machiavellians out there, I think it's prudent to remind oneself of the quote from the great thinker himself: wars begin when you will, but they do not end when you please. And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And again, this is why it's so important that before you engage in military operations, you have clear, definable objectives, which are attainable. Right? If too many of your objectives depend on what may happen in the future in the form of like what your opponent agrees to do, that's a difficult objective, right? Unless you're willing to actually dedicate the resources to destroy them. In World War II, we were hell-bent on the unconditional surrender of the Japanese and the Germans, and so we completely mobilized for war and fought it. But you also had a U.S. population that was completely dedicated to that, right? That's not the same conditions here. So you have to set conditions that actually make sense. Robin Page said, regime change can work. Look at Grenada and Panama. Nation building can work. That's what the Marshall Plan was. It works when you do it right. Okay, well, first of all, Panama was a fairly simple operation to take out Noriega, right? And Grenada was a small island in the middle of the Caribbean. We're not talking about populations with 90 million people and a massive Islamic Republican Guard Corps. Right. So let's be intellectually honest with what we're talking about. We need to compare apples to apples here. And yes, nation building can work. It worked in a place like Germany in part because, one, you had a system of government that you were reintroducing. Germany had not spent in its entire existence fascist. It had been a republic. It had had a democratic system. Right. And so when we kicked out Hitler and we replaced the Nazis, we were basically replacing it with something that they already had familiarity with and were a party to. Not to mention the fact that you had a massive threat in the form of the Soviet Union, which also was highly encouraging. And while the Marshall Plan was successful in some areas, in other areas it wasn't so successful, and it was a bad economic plan in some ways. Japan, on the other end, we had to drop the sun on them twice and then occupy it. Like we literally grinded them down into the ground, and then we occupied them for decades. So once again, conditions and catalysts. Do those conditions exist in Iran right now? I would say the answer is no, and that's what leads me to my hard no. And then Kevin said, again, thanks for the super chat. Trump opened the Strait of Hormuz by U.S. Marines taking the Strait of Hormuz Islands by providing arms and air support to the Balochistan, that's the south eastern portion of the country, Liberation Army to free. Okay. That all sounds great. That all sounds great. But here's the deal. All you need is one ballistic missile to hit a tanker. All you need is a fleet of one-way drones to hit a tanker and destabilize it. And not only that, but once you actually deploy ground forces over there, now you got to hold terrain, which means you need a whole different logistical supply chain in order to do it, which means you need to anticipate greater U.S. casualties. And now if you're opening the Strait of Hormuz right after Donald Trump said, we don't need the oil, it's for the Europeans. Well, you're going to have a lot of Americans. Great. If we don't need it, why are we deploying Marines to take the Strait? The thing that you have to take into consideration right now is that Iran is not trying to defeat the United States military. They're trying to convince the American public and our Western allies that this war is not something that should be fought. That's it. That's it. Robin points out too that Iran has not been jihadist for its whole history. I know that. I know that. But for 49 years, it's been run by the Islamic Republic. And for 49 years, there has not been a sufficient resistance group within Iran in which to rally behind, control terrain, and resist it. There's been very brave Iranian people that have come forward and protest, but they were mowed down by the thousands because this regime doesn't mind killing its own people in order to attain power. And we have to take that into consideration when we're considering how much of our resources we're going to deploy to actually do this. So let's jump in right now. I'm going to bring up this... We're bringing this article from Center for Strategic and International Studies. And they came up with basically kind of three options for like nuclear off-ramps. So three options for getting us out of Iran. One was their military option. And if you look at this, it says first, the United States could choose, I'm going to highlight this right here so you can kind of see what I mean. The United States could choose to conduct a sustained aerial campaign aimed at destroying these underground facilities. This option would be the least politically costly since it would not incur a need for boots on the ground. However, it is also less likely to succeed over the long term. Christian, what's your assessment on that?
I mean, it's impossible forever to, stop a country that's completely determined to obtain a nuclear weapon from doing so unless you basically militarily occupy them, right? Yeah. And I think the vast majority of Americans don't want to see a ground invasion of Iran. So, yeah. I mean, it goes back to the problem that we were briefly articulating earlier. And that apparently Machiavelli has a quote talking about, right? That like, you can choose when to start a war, but the other side gets a say. And you can't just declare victory and then, the other side's going to respect it. Like if we can sit there and bomb them all day long, but as long as they have the means to keep things like the Strait of Hormuz closed, and as long as they have the willpower to try to develop a nuclear weapon, then you're stuck in a situation where you could have a forever war. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that it will literally be a forever war, right? That doesn't mean that like 1,000 years from now, you're going to still be fighting this fight. But I foresee a situation where there are no easy off ramps right now, where you can simultaneously.
Well, wait, Christian, don't jump ahead. I'm just saying, like, I agree with you that if we did a sustained air campaign, you're going to run into two issues. First of all, like they said, I agree that it's the least politically costly because you're not likely to sustain a lot of casualties. And it's less expensive than doing a full like ground force operation. The problem is going to be, though, it's like, how can you actually know how much you've accomplished? Especially when it comes to the Iran stockpile of about 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, right? How do you know you've destroyed that without putting boots on the ground? And that's why they actually said there's a couple other options here. The second and third options both involve putting boots on the ground. One path is to send a ground raid to known facilities, including Isfahan's underground facility, to blow up the facilities from the inside. This would require a large expeditionary force to secure a perimeter around the facilities, demolition teams to break through the buried tunnel entrances, and teams to destroy the facility. Any personnel entering the tunnels would need self-contained breathing apparatus. That always makes that all this stuff makes it really, really expensive. It would be very difficult not impossible to pull this off. We could do it, but it would be difficult. And then they say the most comprehensive option is to seize and remove the material from Iranian control. This operation would bust open the tunnel entrances, identify and remove the nuclear material, and transport it away from Iran. Both of those are incredibly difficult. And again, I'm not saying the United States military couldn't pull off something incredible. It's within our capability to do this. It's a question of how much time, money, effort, and casualties do you want to sustain. They said the second one is the diplomatic option. Second is the diplomatic option. On March 25th, the Trump administration offered a 15-point peace plan using Pakistan as a mediator, which included limits on Iran's nuclear programs, such as dismantling all nuclear facilities, turning over all nuclear material and equipment to the IAEA, and never again enriching uranium. An Iranian resource responded that Iran is ready to provide all the necessary guarantees that it will never develop nuclear weapons, but is entitled to peaceful use of nuclear technology. The diplomatic option would need to find a workaround for this impasse. Yeah, I don't. I tend to agree with the Trump administration that any sort of peaceful nuclear plan is ultimately going to serve their desire to achieve nuclear weapons. A country that is as oil rich as Iran. It is one thing to say for a nation like France, which is to say that, gosh, we're really concerned about the planet and global warming, and we don't have a bunch of oil, and so we want to develop nuclear power as a way to respond to a lot of our energy requirements. Makes perfect sense. I highly encourage the United States, even though we do have more oil, to be able to develop nuclear power as well. Iran, again, they're in a situation where they have regularly worked through terrorist proxies. They're a leading state sponsor of terror. And they're saying, well, we really want nuclear power for a peaceful thing. Sure you do. First of all, look, you don't need it. You have other things that you can use in abundance. So no, you're not going to get a nuclear power. You're not going to get a nuclear power plant. Go with something else. But the question is again, if they were serious about not wanting a nuclear weapon, I feel like they would agree to the terms that they're not going to develop, again, peaceful nuclear energy. Do you disagree with me on that, Christian?
I mean, probably. It's difficult to tell because on one hand, it's very clear that there's like a historical track record here where you either develop nuclear weapons and survive, or you don't, and you are irrelevant and you're going to get overthrown, right? Like Gaddafi abandoned WMDs. What happened to him, right? Saddam, what happened to him after he dismantled his WMD program? What happened to the regime?
Okay, but wait, so this is, Christian, you're killing me here. Like,
let me finish, and then you can, and then you can object, okay? Libya, Iraq, the apartheid regime in South Africa, they all had WMD programs, right? What happened to all of them? You can go even further. Ukraine inherited at the end of the Soviet Union one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world. They voluntarily dismantled their entire nuclear regime. I guarantee you they're regretting that right now, right? Yeah. They don't have nuclear weapons. They would not have been invaded by the Russians if they had a bunch of ICBMs pointed at Moscow.
Yeah.
So what we've done not we, right? I'm saying this is, a series of events throughout the world over decades, right? But what has happened over the last 40, 50 years is that a precedent has effectively been created around the world that you either develop nuclear weapons and survive as a nation state or a regime or a particular, government structure, or you don't have a nuclear umbrella and you get invaded or deposed or have your government toppled. And the Iranians are looking around and they're saying, well, this is why the North Koreans developed nuclear weapons. It gives them an umbrella. It means that there's not going to be invasion across the south.
I get all of that. But my problem with using Iraq as an example is Saddam Hussein did everything he possibly could to convince the world that he still did have WMDs. Right.
And he didn't just stupid on his part.
Yeah, it was. It proved to be very stupid on his part. Why? Because we invaded and took him out. If he had just said, yep, I don't have him, I'm totally complying, we might not have invaded again. So that's my point, where I don't think Iraq is a good example of what you're talking about. I don't think South Africa is a good example either, because then you essentially had a Western power that had developed a nuclear capability, and they allowed for an internal overthrow of their government. So those two I don't really accept. Ukraine, I get it, because Ukraine got certain assurances from the West, and again, to be fair, to include the United States, that if it gave up its nuclear arsenal, that its territorial borders would be respected, and they would be defended by the West if there was ever issues with Russia or anyone else. So I get that. So again, I'm not arguing the point on whether or not nuclear weapons provide a deterrent. It's clear that they do. There's no question that they do. It's a question of whether or not some nations should be allowed to have them when we have the capacity to prevent them from attaining them. And the Ayatollah is one where, again, Kim Jong-un is as crazy as they come, but he doesn't want to die, and he certainly doesn't believe that he can bring about the return of the 12th Imam or whatever it is. right? The Iranians kind of do. And not to mention the fact that, again, all of their activities through proxies create conditions where they don't need an ICBM. They need enough material to make dirty bombs, which they can then deploy out through proxies. And that's what scares the hell out of everybody, is a dirty bomb going off in Riyadh or Dubai or Jerusalem or wherever else. And the Iranians basically being like, wasn't us. Right. So this is the part where, again, it's like, let's be honest about this. This isn't, most regimes that have nuclear weapons have them because they have some sort of major existential threat that would like to get rid of them. Not just as a regime, but to potentially absorb their country. Right. Iran is, nobody's going to convince me that the Ayatollah honestly believes that the United States wants to invade and colonize Iran. The Ayatollah knows that if they gave up a nuclear weapons program, right, nobody's invading them, right? Iraq did, right? But Iraq's certainly not in a position to do that. In fact, Iran has more influence over Iraq now than they probably ever have. What other country is looking to invade and take over Iran and try to control it at this stage in the game? I would argue none of them. And even if they tried, Iran actually has, between its oil wealth and its population, a significant advantage over any of its neighbors. So no, they want to develop nuclear weapons for offensive reasons.
I just don't see. I don't see a scenario. It's a terrible situation that we find ourselves in, and I say we like in a broad sense, not just the United States. I mean, I think that people already know like what my position. It's so hard to have these conversations on the internet, right? Because you can articulate what you want to see happen, and then you can articulate what you think is currently happening and what you think is likely to happen. And there could be no overlap between those two things, and people will immediately assume that there is, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think people already know my thoughts on it. I wish that this war had never started. I wish that there was a way that we could end it. I don't think that this is in our interests. But all of that said,
well, wait, let me add something. Actually, finish.
I see us moving towards a situation where only one of two things happens. And I don't want either to happen, but I feel like increasingly that it is inevitable that you're going to get one of these two things. Either Iran will develop a nuclear weapon that they can deploy whenever they want, or there will be forcible regime change in the country. And it's going to be one of those two. And I don't want it to be either, right? Because one of those options is very dangerous, right? The proliferation of nuclear weapons, especially in the hands of a regime that chants death to America, that has openly supported terrorist groups that have killed Americans. Like, that quite frankly just hates our country, right?
Yeah. And
the other option is Bush War III, right?
Yeah.
Which I think would be a disaster domestically, politically. I think it would fracture the right. It would weaken us at home. It would lead to a resurgence of the left in power in the same way that they exploited the Iraq and Afghanistan wars in 2006 to then take control of Congress and then give us Obama. And we already know what happened as a result of all of that, right? But I feel like that we are moving in a direction where one of those two things is inevitable. Either Iran will develop a nuclear weapon or there will be forcible regime change in the country. And I think either of those are terrible, terrible outcomes if you're somebody that's on the right living in the United States.
Sure. No, the thing I take issue with is the whole idea of like, none of this is in our interests. Like, this is the part where I wish we were capable right now. And I'm not slamming you for this. This is kind of a broader conversation I see going on the right. I wish we were capable of just analyzing these things logically to the sense where we can say anybody that's saying this is a guaranteed win, this is an absolute must for the United States, shut up. And anybody saying this is not in our interest at all, this is all Israel, or this is all the military industrial, shut up. All right. The bottom line is there is a 49-year history here. That's just the start of it. We could go back even farther. Some people want to go to 53. Some people want to go beyond. There is a long history of animosity between the Islamic Republic and the United States in which they have engaged in kinetic operations against us, against our allies, against our interests. They are a constant destabilizing feature within the Middle East. They constantly work through terrorist proxies to kill Americans, to include killing Americans in Iraq. And so the idea of degrading their nuclear capability, degrading their offensive capability, degrading their ability to work through proxies, anybody who tells me that's not in our interest, you either don't understand our interest or you're being hyperbolic. The real question is not whether or not there are things in our interest, whether or not there are potential benefits and potential costs. The real question is the one that, again, total respect for Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh said, look, it's real simple. You show me more benefits than costs, I'm willing to discuss it. When I look at Iran, I don't see more benefits than costs. And that's a rational approach, right? Like I was so frustrated with Joe Kent because I had said, if Joe Kent said, I resign because I don't see any way that we get out of this without a ground invasion, and in the end, I don't think we're going to achieve our objectives and more Americans are going to get killed, I think it's a bad idea. If he would have said that, I've been like, reasonable people might be able to disagree, but I get it. I get where Joe's coming from. But no, Joe went in there and be like, no, Israel explains everything. This was all, it's like, Joe, you spent 6 years on social media talking about all the death, devastation, damage, and destruction that Iran was responsible for. And now all of a sudden this explains everything. I'm so tired of that from both sides, to be perfectly honest. But when I just want to be able to say, like, look, as I look at this, the potential benefits, and again, as I look at the objectives that Trump originally laid out, I would say that when it comes to sinking the Navy and destroying the Air Force, mission accomplished. When it comes to severely degrading their ability to be able to manufacture drones, ballistic missiles, and everything else, pretty much accomplished. When it comes to being able to support and work through the proxies, partially accomplished, because you never really shut that down entirely unless you get regime change. When it comes to degrading their ability to create nuclear weapons, I don't know to what degree that has been further diminished since the original attack, the Midnight Hammer attacks, right? I'm sure that it has, but do they still have the enriched uranium? And was that the goal? Was that the additional thing that we were trying to get? That hasn't been as clearly articulated. So I have to give that a 50-50 at best. And then when it comes to this whole idea of never attaining a nuclear weapon, well, the only way you're doing that is if you change out the regime that wants a nuclear weapon. We've said that regime change was not the objective. So how do you actually accomplish that as a criteria? And so that's the part where I look at all this and it's like, I get all the frustration. I just wish we could put it within the proper parameters to say, no, there were reasons to go, but those reasons might not have been sufficient with what we could reasonably achieve, if that makes sense. We got some super chats here. Thomas Crown says, this is July 1914. The stakes aren't Hormuz. They're when does someone saturate the refineries on the other side of the Gulf with munitions, 35% of the world oil offline for 5 years. I'm going to disagree with you on that one, Thomas. I don't think this is anywhere near July 1914. I don't think that Iran possesses the capability to take oil offline, 35% of the world's oil offline for 5 years. I just don't think they possess that capability. Certainly not at this stage in the game when their missile attacks have dropped significantly and their one-way drone attacks have dropped significantly. I don't think they're there. And again, July 1914 is always kind of listed off. It's either that or it's
or 1939
or 1939, right? And it's just, I don't think the conditions are there. That's my opinion. I get the parallel that you're making, but I don't think it's there. Christian, you disagree with me on that one?
No, I don't think it's July 9th. Like the Russians are, the irony is I was about to say the Russians aren't mobilizing, but they are, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
The Russians are not mobilizing to defend their small ally, and the United States is not Germany or Austria-Hungary. There's no domino effect of like multinational alliances activating and suddenly you get a World War III. I know that you have all sorts of people in there that are talking about World War III, World War III.
Yeah.
This is not a World War III. I believe that many people are kind of stuck in the 20th century in terms of how they look at geopolitics, which makes sense. A lot of stuff happened in the 20th century, but in some ways this is more reminiscent of the 19th century than the 20th century. And I mean, look, we know that this isn't 1939 or 1914 because NATO hasn't really been helping us, right? The only way that you get a World War I is if you get an activation of international treaties and you get allies mobilizing to help each other, even though they had nothing to do with the original spark of the problem. And that's not what's taking place right now. The opposite is taking place.
This is the part where we got to look at conditions and catalysts again. And now is there obviously Iran has not been beyond trying to strike facilities on the other side of the Gulf, but they certainly haven't been successful if that's their objective. Now, could that, to your point, let me try to steel man the argument that was made by Thomas Crown. If the argument is that, okay, yeah, but if you go after their infrastructure and everything else, maybe they take the remaining and their ballistic missiles, their drones and everything else, and maybe they attack, maybe they have some capacity to attack that we haven't degraded yet. And all it would take is taking out a couple of those oil refineries. And now all the other countries that are heavily dependent upon this are like, oh, hell no. This has to come to an end. But I think that's what would be most likely to happen. I don't think this boils down into World War III. Not only that, but there's no way you take it offline. There's no way they could damage those refineries in a way to take it offline for 5 years. That just doesn't happen. We would have the capacity to have them up and running again fairly quickly. But you could, like, again, it would still represent a significant shock if they did do something like that, or they were able to take a couple of serious refineries out of commission. Again, 5 years, no, that probably doesn't happen. If they did do it and it was going to be a significant problem for like 6 to 12 months, yeah, you could see pretty much all of America's allies that are heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil going, hey, dude, knock this off. So that's the version of your argument that I see potentially happening. I just don't see it going into a World War III scenario. Kevin, thank you again for the super chat. Should Trump invite Modi to deploy the large and capable Indian Navy, Marines, and Army to open the Straits of Hormuz? India needs Persian Gulf oil. I don't think India has any interest in getting involved in a conflict with Iran. I think that anybody that needs Middle Eastern oil is more likely to kind of wait this out and attempt to apply pressure to the United States. Not to mention the fact that we're running into War Powers Act time where you have that 60-day window. Now, again, Trump could say, I don't recognize the War Powers Act. I don't think it's constitutional. But now he runs into problems where you're going to force something of a constitutional crisis, and he still needs Congress to approve the budgets. So if he can't get the money to get more munitions, at some point your stockpiles run out, and now his hands are tied either way, and it just looks really bad. So I don't personally see that happening. Christian, you got any disagree with me on that?
I don't see the Indian army staging an amphibious landing in the Iranian coastline. I'm not even sure if they could pull it off.
I will say amphibious operations are a lot more difficult than people give them credit for, especially if you're meeting with some sort of resistance. And I don't know why India would put themselves in a position right now to do this. So I just don't see that happening. To the chickens. Side note, kind of hard to have talks when the U.S. and Iran keep offing their negotiators. I don't know. Look, I've seen 300, and sometimes you just got to throw a messenger in a well. All right. Domarasi. That's right. Christian is the only voice of reason here. Freitas is a Jewed up warmonger. There you go.
When you get this is how the internet discourse goes nowadays.
This has become a combination. There's a lot of bots out there.
Just to say that.
No. I think Nate just wanted to make sure that we showed everyone what a quote Jewed up warmonger I am. Yeah, whenever I see that, that has become in certain circles. It's either an Islamist that's saying it, or it's become in kind of like the Nick Fuentes world, it's become the right-wing version of everything I don't like is racist, right? It's the same sort of critical theory logic that they use. And whenever they make the comment, I'm like, oh, good, you're someone I can ignore. Because you could have come back and said, Nick, I think you're wrong for these various reasons. And I think there's been too much influence over here. And I think this influenced this. And this is why I think this was a bad decision. And then I would have actually had an argument to engage with. But instead, it's just, you're a, quote, Jewed up warmonger. Like, okay. All right, I know who you are. To the Chicken said, stated goal of strikes, 24 to 48-hour window of opportunity for color revolution. Congratulations, it failed. Let's go home. So again, to the Chickens, I would disagree that the stated goal of the strikes, 24 to 48-hour window of opportunity. I think what it was is, and again, this is my opinion, free to disagree with me. Christian, we'll get your take too. I think a couple things were going on. I think Trump already had reasons why he wanted to strike Iran. I think part of it was because when he did the midnight hammer strike, he thought that Iran would come back to the negotiating table and they would work something out that just took nuclear off the table. That's the 15-point plan that Trump's offering. It's like, look, we're going to release sanctions. We're going to do all this other stuff. You're going to be able to get your economy going. You just don't get to touch the nukes. You don't get to touch the nukes. You don't get to support Hezbollah and Hamas and everything else and touch the nukes. No nukes. And Iran keeps saying, well, we want it for peaceful purposes. And Trump's like, screw this. They're never going to learn. Then when they started mowing down tens of thousands of protesters, right, all of a sudden there was people thinking, there might be a critical mass within the country capable of affecting regime change, especially if you have elements of the Iranian National Army that are willing to join. And so I think Trump's idea is like, okay, we're going to strike, and these are our objectives for striking. However, Iranian people, members of the Iranian army and police force, you want to rise up and go against your own government, this might be your only chance to do so. I think he saw it as a potential bonus. I don't think he saw it as something that he was willing to really, drive home and actually make happen. And to Trump's credit, Trump has an excellent track record of using the military for punitive expeditions, but not nation building. If you look at what he did with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, he didn't, 4-week operation? He didn't dedicate years and tens of thousands of U.S. troops. It was largely a special ops driven force that achieved the effective dismantling of ISIS, right? So he's been really good at it. That's why when Christian and I were looking at this initially, Christian's like, nope, I don't like it. It's bad. I would say Christian would say, I get the cost, I get the benefit, the cost outweigh or the benefits, don't do it. And my attitude was, I don't know what intel Trump has. Like, I don't like it, but I don't know what intel he has. And if he has if he has intel that kind of justifies either the imminent threat component or that there's sufficient support for overthrowing the regime in Iran, it might be worth it. But I was in more of a wait and see mode on that one. Angie Carr said sorry, Christian, you disagree with me on anything I think
that the spirit of the comment was correct.
Yeah.
Even if maybe on a technical level,
mm-hmm.
One of the stated goals wasn't regime change. I mean, it was heavily implied in Trump's speech that, like, this is going to be your only opportunity for a generation to, overthrow the government. You've got to take it. So yes, there is a little bit of separation there, but again, I'd say the spirit of the comment was correct. And this is why I keep saying that from my perspective, I see that the US, our country, is in a difficult situation because yes, we militarily can dominate the Iranians. I think that is objectively clear. We are not going to be defeated militarily in this conflict, but finding that off-ramp is going to be incredibly difficult. Because yes, it was kind of this idea from my perspective. It seems like that it was this idea that you launch these strikes, you decapitate the leadership, you explicitly go after the police forces and the RGC to destabilize the regime in the hopes that there would be a revolution to overthrow the government. And that window, right, that 48-hour window, there was no revolution, there was no uprising. And now we find ourselves in a situation where, traditional conventional warfare were dominating, but on the asymmetrical propaganda side and on the striking oil tankers and spiking global oil prices in order to sow chaos, the Iranians are doing what the Iranian regime, right, is doing what it needs to do in order to survive another day. Mm-hmm. And the whole reason why I've opposed this from the beginning is not because I didn't think that we couldn't kill a bunch of bad guys that hate us. We obviously can do that, right? The reason that I opposed this from the start is because I feared that we would find ourselves in this type of situation where we cannot extract ourselves from this crisis now. And I see us in a situation where it's going to be very difficult for us to get out of this.
All right, we got one more super chat we're going to get to, and then Christian and I are going to give our closing thoughts on this. So, sorry, we got two more questions, and then we'll do bring it back up, Nate. You already brought it. Producer Nate, put it in there. What was that other question? Okay, so Angie Carr said, in history, when should the U.S. have stopped Iran? 1978. That was the best time to do it would have been to prevent the Shah from ever falling. But there's no way Jimmy Carter was going to.
53 would have been a good one. I know that
it's fun.
Bringing that up.
But by the way, I've seen some libertarians on there like, this is all our fault because of what we did in 1953. There is a podcast called Dad Saves America. Go look at Dad Saves America podcast because he talks a lot about what actually happened in 1953. Because the narrative is, I forget what the name of it, I think it was Operation Ajax. The narrative is that the U.S. and the CIA, we're the ones that keep this good man that just wanted to help the Iranian people from coming to power. And that's what started all of this. Okay, well, the good man that we helped get rid of was actually kind of largely unpopular for a variety of reasons. He was basically nationalizing Iranian oil. So basically, the Iranians invited people to come in and set up their entire oil industry, and it was running, and they were getting profits from it. But this guy, being a socialist, wanted to take it over and nationalize it. So we nationalized it. U.S. companies, British companies moved out and said, fine, we're not using it. You basically ripped us off. You stole our stuff, which you'd think libertarians would understand why people shouldn't steal other people's stuff. But they did. And the end result is that it was tanking the Iranian economy. And now the narrative from the left was like, oh my gosh, you're holding these poor people hostage. It's like, no, you stole our stuff and now we're not going to help you. That seems to actually make sense. Well, the Shah and was asking for that guy to step down. By the way, that guy got appointed later on as well. So this idea of like, oh, there's a straight line from 1953 to 1979. It's just wrong. It's not accurate. And Dad Saves America, you can go watch his episode on it. He brings the real receipts, not the kind of receipts we see nowadays where it's really vibes posing as receipts. He actually goes through the entire timeline and he talks about the various leaders that come up and he talks about what the Shah did. And it's like, this is what happened. And then this is what happened right before the Islamic Revolution. So if we really wanted to stop things, it would have happened a little bit earlier in the process. We would have given more support to the Shah.
My second date, the second date that I was going to throw out was the 7th century AD.
Yeah, Rip Manzikert. That's Manzikert is what really caused all this crap.
This could have all no 7th century, not 11th. Like this all could have been resolved if the Sassanids had won the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah.
Yeah, that's true.
Against the Arabs.
That's true. That was the first time because the Sassanids and the Byzantines have basically been beating each other up to a stalemate. And then all of a sudden the Arabs come out of nowhere and just start beating the crap out of them. All right, 2 more here. Matt G said, so if 8 p.m. comes around tomorrow and Iran turns Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, et cetera, refineries and desalination plants to rubble, then what? They thought they wouldn't do that, what they did when the war started, no plan. Matt, here, okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that what you're saying isn't something that should be considered. I'm saying what is the actual probability of them being able to accomplish all of this? And I'm not saying I don't know. I'm not claiming I know the answer to that, but I don't think it's quite as devastating as what you're suggesting. And when you say no plan, this is the other thing that I have a problem with, right? It's this idea that because something wasn't taken into consideration to the degree that you would want, or that might even be appropriate, right? Because I'm not discounting what you're saying, that there's just no plan and everyone's a stupid and everyone's an idiot and everyone's a moron. I think that there's probably a combination of some bad intel, which I get it. I get the frustration there, but I don't think it's no plan. I think that what probably happened is that the objectives that were stated were, arguably some of them were, I think, more limited, more reasonable objectives than others. And thus far, Iran has not been able to pull off what you're predicting. Now, again, something could change. Now, I will say this, to your point, if I'm wrong, and all of a sudden a bunch of ballistic missiles and a bunch of drones take out the refineries on the other side of the Gulf and take out the desalination plants, then I will sit here right now and say, I was wrong. Y'all were right. Holy crap. How did we miss that? Right. I will admit it. I will be intellectually honest. I have a hard time believing that Iran still possesses that capability at this stage in the game. In part because one of the things that the United States had gotten very tired of in that region, Saudi Arabia had gotten very tired of in the region, UAE had gotten tired of, and of course Israel had gotten tired of, was this idea of Iran constantly threatening its neighbors. That's why I say when people say this is all Israel, or this is all just the United States, or this is all the military-industrial complex, or this is all just oil. No, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more to it. Iran has been arguably one of the worst and most destabilizing players within a very strategic part of the world since it came into power in 1979. So that's why I'm a little bit more sympathetic to hitting their capabilities, especially their offensive capabilities. But the one thing I will agree with, and I don't think Christian and I have any disagreements on this one, is this was always going to be very, very tenuous. There was always kind of a really, really thin margin for error here. And without effective regime change, it begs the question, why are you doing this again if regime change is not going to be the goal, and it's obvious that the conditions on the ground don't exist for successful regime change at this stage? And that leads me into my final analysis. I think I'm going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll start off with the ugly. The ugly is that if we get involved in a major ground operation in Iran, I don't see any way that Republicans keep hold of the midterms, which means whatever we initially launch will be immediately pulled out. There won't be the funding for it. There won't be the support for it. That would lead to just Democrats taking control of the House and probably the Senate. The MAGA coalition would fracture significantly to the point where I don't think it can be reconciled at that point. There would probably be no path to victory in the midterms, and there'd probably be no path to victory in 28. Because the Democrats will leverage that like nobody's business, and it will resonate with a lot of Americans, because even the people like me that are like, look, I'm not too sure about this, but I'm willing to give Trump more rope than I would give anybody else because he's proven he doesn't get us involved in nation building operations. Even people like me would be like, gosh, damn it, right? I want to go vote Democrat. I want to sit out the election, but there's no way I would see us winning in the midterms, and that makes it really, really hard to win in 28. And if the Democrats get control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency in 28, the long-term damage that's going to do to the United States and the sort of domestic upheaval that we will see will be unlike anything that we've experienced. Forget the BLM riots. It'll be anything like we've experienced in a long time in this country, if you know what I mean. That's the ugly. The ugly is what our activity over in the Middle East does to our domestic politics here at home, and how that sets us up for like just absolute domestic problems like you would not believe. The bad would be a situation where Trump has to extricate himself out of this, and we leave, but we don't have a good narrative on why we went in the first place. We can't really point to objectives being met the way that we would like. And so we get out and gas prices drop, and maybe we barely hold on to the House and the Senate, but this is going to be seen as kind of a pall on the Trump administration. And, again, maybe it hurts us in the midterms. Maybe the Democrats take the House, but not the Senate. Maybe there's other things that Trump is still able to do domestically. But again, the bad is we're hurt in the House. We probably lose the House. We don't lose the Senate. But we're not set up for success in 2028. And even though we have achieved some of our objectives with respect to diminishing Iran's military capability, the Democrats taking charge of the House is a signal to them that we're not going to strike them again for as long as the Trump administration is operating. That's the bad. The good. Let's go about. And again, I'm going to try to come up with a reasonably attainable good scenario here. A reasonable good scenario is the threat of the threat of taking out the infrastructure and the power plants is enough to get Iran to the negotiating table, to actually come forward and say, okay, we're going to give you the 15 points on the nuclear. We want peaceful nuclear power to still be on the discussion. We still want it to be on the table as a discussion. So we're not conceding that point, but we're not asking you to concede the point. We'll allow the Straits of Hormuz. We won't threaten the Straits of Hormuz. We'll allow that to come out. And we want to get certain sanctions against our economy lifted. And so the reason why this would be beneficial, and the reason why I would say this would be a good scenario, is because theoretically you could have an environment which who knows how long it would last for. Let's just acknowledge that right off the bat. Who knows how long it would last for? But theoretically you could have a scenario where the Ayatollah is worried enough about maintaining power that he says, okay, if I can be the guy that I didn't concede on the peaceful nuclear power, I can say that I conceded to the same thing that previous Ayatollahs conceded to, but I didn't concede on getting rid of peaceful nuclear power. But I can get sanctions lifted and I can consolidate power because I really need to consolidate at this point. Then that's a win for me. And in any situation where you're leaving the other regime intact, you have to provide both sides an opportunity to say they got to win. Trump gets to say, I got 14 of the 15 points that I wanted. We've severely degraded their power, and I didn't concede on the peaceful nuclear energy. We're just going to have future talks on what that looks like. Oil prices go down. It looks like he managed to extricate himself from the narrative from MAGA is going to be like, see, you panicans did it again. You said it was going to be World War III. You said there was going to be a ground invasion. You said it was going to be this. You said it was going to be that. And none of that happened. Gas prices are dropping. We now have a friendlier relationship with Iran than we've ever had before, right? Again, regardless of whether that's and oil prices are dropping. We got 14 of the 15 points we wanted, and the 15th point is still being negotiated. But now we're at a point where Iran's no longer in a position to be able to support the drone activity with Russia. And they're not able to operate through their proxies like they did before. All of those relationships are in fact degraded. And of course, their offensive capability, navally and from an Air Force perspective, is gone. So if that happened, then I could actually see that as a potential good, where maybe Christian's going to scowl at me. Maybe the Republicans keep control of the House and the Senate, and we don't go through the next 2 years of hearing nothing but, little House tribunals trying to impeach Trump or trying to arrest ICE agents for enforcing federal immigration law. So there you go. There's my good, bad, and ugly. Christian, tear it to pieces.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to think of like a different way to articulate this. Like maybe this is the Panikin take versus the Plan Truster take.
Well, no, you can do a good, bad, the ugly thing. But I mean, I just told you what my good, bad, and ugly is. I'm looking for you to say, okay, from, again, a reasonable perspective of the things that could potentially happen, what do you see as a good, bad, or ugly?
I mean, good would be this wraps up by Friday and oil prices crater and Trump gets back to deporting 10 million illegal aliens. And the coalition, comes back together again and we save America, right? Like that's good, right?
Yeah.
Because this has clearly become a wedge issue on the right. Like it just simply has. Now I think that there's no pun intended. I think that there's a bit of diversity on the right here in terms of it being a wedge issue. There are two different types of, well, in a way, there's actually four different types of people on the right on this. You've got the just flat out neocon types, right? That are seeing like, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity for us to get what we've always wanted, which is another permanent Middle East
Lindsey Graham wing. South Carolina, can you do us all a favor and replace him with like a real conservative? That would be great.
I mean, think about it from this standpoint. There's been a chunk of people on the right who vehemently opposed Trump in 2016 and supported Ron DeSantis against Trump in the primaries in 2024. And they only came around to support Trump at the very end in 2024. And they're basically neocons. And from their perspective, they're like, we're getting exactly what we want. I find these people to be untrustworthy, to put it lightly, because they will not support somebody unless they feel like that they can control that person. Like they've not been team players. They will use you when you're in power, but they will never support you unless they think that you're one of them. And so I find these people fundamentally untrustworthy and not good partners to build a large right-wing coalition around. Then you've got the plan trusters, the MAGA diehards who, they will support Trump no matter what he does, because they will support Trump no matter what he does, right? Like they have such distrust in everybody else that he is they're kind of the North Star to them. Yeah. And I get that logic to a degree. I mean, especially in an age where, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. Trump was this populist figure. Like, I don't need to articulate that. I think we all know who we're talking about here. The MAGA base that is, they will never walk away from him. Yeah. Then you have what Trump calls the panicans. And there's two different types of people in there. One, I don't think is actually appropriately called panicans, because in some ways they're actually subversive counter signalers. There's a difference, though. There genuinely is. It's hard to understand it maybe from the outside, but there is a genuine difference between the people that are opposing Trump right now, that are vocal about it, that are maybe dooming about it, that are being like, we're going to get crushed in the midterms, or we're going to throw away the 2028 presidential cycle, and this is terrible. I can't believe that Trump is doing this. I vehemently oppose this. This is distracting from deportations and all the other domestic stuff that we need to be doing right now, DOGE, all these things, right? There is a clear distinction between those people that the MAGA coalition are now calling the panicans and the people that are just, quite frankly, indistinguishable from leftists, except for putting an edgy spin on it. Right? These are people that are saying, like, there is if there's no coalition to be had with the neocons that will simply use and abuse you and then chuck you aside when you're no longer useful, and they will never be team players, right? They will always demand 100% of what they want, and they will never pitch in anything else. There's also there is no coalition to be built with somebody who thinks that Turning Point USA killed Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump. There isn't.
Yeah.
And we're just, quite frankly, third worldists at this point that are rooting for Iran, rooting for the death of Americans, and are actively telling people to vote Democrat.
Yeah, when Tucker Carlson is going out there talking about how great Sharia law is, I'm like, are we serious right now? Like, what world do we live in?
Distinction between Tucker and some of these other people, but like my point is that these hardcore neocon types and these hardcore, I'm going to crash out and tell people to vote Democrat.
Yeah.
Right? Like you cannot build there's nothing I can say to convince somebody who thinks Turning Point USA killed Charlie Kirk, wants Trump impeached, and is telling people vote Democrat. You're just my enemy. You're just my enemy. And likewise, there's nothing that I can say to placate a neocon who will never support my candidates. They just simply want their agenda, which is permanent regime change and permanent warfare in foreign countries. And they don't really have any other principles outside of that. And like that's kind of the problem that I see on the right now, is that you have these two malignant factions that you cannot really work with, and they're trying to turn this into something else. And then the actual right that used to be working together has fractured on this issue. And you have one side that is panicking, and you have another side that is just, you know, kind of blindly supporting whatever Trump says. And both sides are now currently viewing each other as adversaries when they're actually natural allies. And if we don't come back together, then we're all just surely gonna, you know, it's the whole Ben Franklin quote, right? You know, surely we must all hang together, or else we will all hang separately. And
I
all hanging separately.
Well, and it's interesting because everything you brought up there was not about operations in Iran. It was about domestic politics. And I want to use that to segue into this question that Robin Page asked. And he goes, so you're saying we just let the hornet's nest fester and grow until we get stung to death by a monster hive? Because it seems like that's the case. Robin, please hear me, okay? Because I'm seeing it. You've got the Iranian flag, not the Islamic Republic flag. You've got the Iranian flag in your bio there. And I'm just assuming that this is something that is not just important to you, but deeply personal. And I'm not discounting that. I'm using that to assume that you have you invested in this, and for good reason. And I can just tell you that I cannot stand the Islamic regime. But everything Christian just said was accurate. Is that the bottom line is that you and I might want the Iranian regime gone. The question is what does it take to do? What does it take to do it? And when you talk about, so we just let it grow into a bigger hive, can I ask you a question with all due respect? Do the Iranian people feel that way? Because if the Iranian people feel that way, then they are going to have to be the ones that eventually do this. It can't be the United States' job and responsibility to go around and effect regime change everywhere around the world, even when it's really bad. That cannot be our sole responsibility. And that's what's so frustrating about this. Look, Robin, I have pissed off people on both sides of this debate because neither side thinks I'm pure enough for them. Because what I'm looking at is I completely sympathize with the idea of getting rid of this regime. But I also understand the practical realities with respect to actually achieving it. And guess what, Robin? You don't achieve it if Democrats control Congress. You certainly don't achieve it then. Ever. You know what Democrats give you if they control Congress? Mass immigration. They give you the degradation of the United States. They give you the splitting and fracture of the most powerful country in the world. And then we're not doing anything. And the bottom line is that if you want good things for the United States, and I do, then I have to be thinking about first and foremost what puts us in the best position to ensure that we can achieve that here at home. Not because I want to completely ignore the outside world, but the outside world's problems are not paramount to me over our own domestic problems. And I'm not an isolationist. I believe that sometimes we need to use power, kinetic power, military power, economic power, in order to achieve our objectives, which are in the interest of the United States. But what Christian and I are trying to articulate here is that if the conditions do not exist on the ground to achieve successful regime change in Iran without major deployment of U.S. ground forces, then guess what? The conditions don't exist for it to happen at all right now. That's not to say that it can't or shouldn't happen in the future. But if it can't happen right now, I'm sorry, I don't buy the argument that, well, if you don't do it today, then tomorrow they're going to be even stronger. If you can't do it today, right now, if you can't do it without a massive U.S. ground invasion, guess what? You don't win any elections. You don't get any of the domestic policy that you need to in the United States. You don't right the ship here at home, and then forget what you're trying to do in the rest of the world. That's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that if you set up the conditions for Democrats to run this country because of what you're doing in a foreign policy situation that is not easily achievable, you have not helped the United States or anyone else. That's what I'm saying. So please, with respect, I'm someone that fought a war that was told that if we don't fight them over here, then we'll have to fight them here. Well, guess what? I did fight them over here, and guess what I'm doing now? Fighting them here. And that's the part that a lot of us that actually wore the uniform of this country and fought overseas want to see this administration zeroing on right now. Because while I can acknowledge that the Islamic Republic is a threat, is a problem, and something that we're going to have to deal with, what I can also acknowledge is millions of people coming into my country illegally is a huge threat. What I can also acknowledge is that the Democratic Party taking power is a huge threat to things I hold dear. And so what a lot of us are saying is, don't ignore this overall, but Matt Walsh has made some pretty good points, and he's not a panikin. And he doesn't deserve to be put in that category because he's skeptical of whether or not this was worth the time, effort, and treasure and blood at this point. That's it. That's all we're saying. That's all we're saying. We got a few more questions here, and then we're going to go ahead and close out. Let me see. Legatus 2KX said IDF troops only should be used for ground troops. Yeah, I mean, they don't possess the capability to go over there and fight on the ground without U.S. assistance. But I get what you're saying. Jesus Freak of 2000 said, question, where are people getting that bombing power plants is a war crime? My leftist friends are freaking out. Yeah, it's not a war crime to go after an energy generating infrastructure, which helps, with the conduct of war. The left is taken on this absurd idea that anytime civilians are impacted, that's a war crime, and that's just not reality. So it's ridiculous. Love USA said mass immigration is the root cause of USA's decline. They take away your jobs, culture, and sovereignty. Democrats are the enablers of mass immigration. Why are you still going to vote for Democrats? I don't know why anybody would vote for Democrats at this point. And again, when we talk about the problem, there was a time in this country's history where we were able to absorb a lot more immigration than we are today. And the reason why is because we have a lot of unsettled areas within the United States. But it was also this idea that we didn't have this massive welfare program. We didn't have this massive system where you came to the United States and the U.S. taxpayer was on the hook for your well-being. And we didn't cater to you. If you came over to the United States, you were here to become an American. And the bottom line is that all changed, and a lot of that is Hart-Celler. The Hart-Celler Act needs to be repealed. Christian's talked about this a lot. He's done a good job talking about it, but yeah, it's an issue. The bottom line is the United States needs to take something of a pause on immigration so we can once again reinforce what it means to be an American. And that the American is not just an economic free trade zone. We are actually a culture with a people. We have certain religious, economic, social, and political traditions. And if you're coming from a place that is diametrically opposed it, well, then you better be coming here because you really want to become an American, not because you're trying to infiltrate and take over. By the way, I'm sorry, to all the Republicans that voted against this idea of investigating Ilhan Omar and what I think is an obvious case of immigration fraud, put on your big boy pants or your big girl pants. And it's time to actually go after that. Michael Balmer, as you said, without the willingness of the local population of a country that is living under a totalitarian regime change is impossible. See Afghanistan. Yeah, Michael, that's the condition that I wish people would just understand what I'm trying to say here. Again, there's a lot of regimes around the world I don't like. I don't like communist regimes. Does that mean the United States is on the hook to invade, take over China, and replace its regime with one that we think is more in line with our principles and values? No, it isn't. And the same thing is true about Iran. And it's especially true, I would argue, about Islamic countries. Islamic countries, look, I'm a Christian. That is what is the single most important part of my identity is my Christianity. Single most important part. Islamic countries have a certain way of life that they would like to live under. And what we've seen is that unless the people in that country don't want that or want to replace it with something else, you're not just going to bomb your way into something. You're not going to bomb your way into a Western parliamentary style democracy, unless, of course, you are willing to engage in stuff that Western values will not let you engage in. So unless you're willing to go there and camp out for 100 years and colonize the place, which we've all been told is bad now, unless, of course, it's people coming from Islamic countries to, the West, then it's okay, apparently. Then yeah, I'm sorry, we're at a point where you're not going to be able to achieve your objectives. And so what you can do is you can actually focus your energy and efforts where you have more benefits and more reasonable objectives that can easily be obtained. And that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you won't run into conflicts, but the United States has managed to operate in somewhat normalized terms with different sectors of the Islamic world. Iran isn't one of them. And it has everything to do with their particular regime. To the chickens, I'm an isolationist because if our government was capable of prioritizing domestic over foreign issues, they would have demonstrated it by now. So I'm not an isolation. I guess it depends what you mean by an isolationist. I'm not an isolationist in the sense that I don't think we should trade with other countries or have interactions with other countries, but do I think we should have a lot less interventionist foreign policy? Yeah, I do. That's not to say, like, look, here's the other frustration for me about what's going on in Iran right now. If you look at Trump's foreign policy thus far, it's actually been pretty successful. Right. In his first term, it was taking out ISIS. It was killing Soleimani. In his second term, he worked out a brilliant negotiation with Greenland. So far, things in Venezuela seem to be going very, very well. Panama, which nobody really talks about, but he achieved some incredible things there in Panama, just with economic and talk of the military, not even going in and doing anything. And then it looks like we might actually have a successful end of the communist regime in Cuba without a massive ground invasion or anything like that. So Trump overall in foreign policy has done very, very well. And one of the things I hate about this is all the people that are trashing him now. It's like, guys, the reason why he calls so many of you panicans is because you flip out over everything having to do with foreign policy. One of the president's primary functions is to deal with foreign policy. Guys, news alert, for all of us who love the Constitution, the federal government was never supposed to be this involved in domestic policy. Foreign policy was the primary reason why the federal government was established in the first place. Foreign policy and to help achieve basically a free trade economic zone among the several states. So again, I just think we need to put it in the proper perspective. But to your point, to the chickens, I totally understand the isolationist impulse right now, because we do have so many domestic issues where if we don't deal with them quickly, it's not going to matter what happens in the rest of the world. We've got to get our own house in order first. So I totally understand your position there. I do. Michael Ballmer said, do either of you believe a multi-country coalition with Kuwait, Saudis, and Qatar, as well as Israel, could liberate Iran, as it would be primarily Muslim nations ending a totalitarian regime? The problem is logistics. If you don't have Iraq as part of that, then you don't have the access necessary in order to actually mount a successful regime change. Let me tell you what I think is probably the best case scenario for successful regime change in Iran. It's a multi-generational effort to actually work with dissident elements within Iran that want to overthrow the regime. And you're basically going to have to build that up. And then what I would do is I would start looking at your junior officer corps within the Iranian national army. And I would start building elements there to where if you did have like an insurgency force that was willing to overthrow the regime, you would have set it up where now all of a sudden you have a bunch of colonels. So you have a bunch of battalion commanders, potentially brigade commanders that are willing to defect over to the resistance. But that's a long-term, multi-generational strategy where you are like investing in the conditions long-term in order to achieve that sort of regime change. I don't see any coalition with Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. First of all, the Kuwaiti military, Saudi Arabia military, and Emirati military do not possess the capability of fighting a successful ground war in Iran. I do not believe they are capable of it. I don't care how much equipment we give them. I don't believe they're capable of it. The Israelis could pull it off in like a pitched battle scenario, but it's a question of how do they get their troops there? right? They'd have to get him through what? They'd have to get him through Iraq. I don't see that happening. Afghanistan, don't see that happening, right? Like I just Azerbaijan, maybe, but I just don't see that taking place. How did they get to Azerbaijan, right? Do they got to go through Turkey, right? So the thing is, I don't see it actually happening. Again, the only way I see successful regime change taking place in Iran is that, first of all, if the Shah's son wants to be serious about this, then why isn't he going around raising funds in order to support a freedom fighter movement in his own country? Why is it completely dependent on the U.S. carrying the heavy lifting or Israel doing the heavy lifting? It's going to have to be a groundswell of support among the Iranian people who are going to have to build it up over years. Again, we can get them equipment. We can get them equipment if they're willing to actually assume the risk. But they're going to have to do it in parts of the country where they're going to have a semi-permissive environment. That's one where they don't control it, but they have enough freedom of maneuver to where they can actually stockpile. So that would probably be in the Azerbaijani and Kurdish provinces. But that's how I see it. That's the only way I personally see it successfully taking place, is with strong domestic support. Love USA said Trump's main goal is to destroy Iran's ability to get hold of nukes in the next few months because they already have 60% enriched uranium. Trump never said he definitely want regime change. Love USA. No, I think, again, I think Trump did have far more limited objectives. And I think, I don't know what intel he had, and it's not like he can share it. There's a lot of people mad. Oh, Trump's threatening this, Trump's threatening that. Yeah, because Trump needs Iran to think he'll do anything. Right. So that's the part where he's calling some people like, oh, they want me to tell the whole strategy. I'm not going to do it. Yeah. And he shouldn't. Right. Trump should leave everything on the table when he's negotiating. These people that are insisting that he promised not to do this or promised not to do that, that's idiotic. Right. When you're fighting with somebody, you don't promise to do anything except beat their ass until you get the successful agreement that you want. And that's what Trump's doing. And that's what he should be doing, insofar as he's going to fight this conflict. And then Angie Carr, last one for today. Angie Carr said, you see the Patriot Act in any way necessary. I'm a fan of repealing the Patriot Act, to be honest. There was useful, here was the only useful case for the Patriot Act. The problem was we did have a lot of stovepipes, which made it difficult for different intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies to be able to cooperate. And so the idea of the Patriot Act was we were going to allow for greater communication. I think it has allowed for far more than was actually necessary. And when you have to always balance two things. If you want to live in a free society, then you have to have limitations with respect to what your government is capable of doing. However, when you limit your government's capabilities, you also limit their capabilities to deal with foreign or domestic threats. And so there's a balancing act. And the question was there some legislation that was probably necessary in order to allow for a greater communication under certain conditions? Yes. Has it gone too far? I believe it has. And so that's why I would say that, again, at this point, it probably needs to go away. And then finally, the last one we have from Neil Brooks. Happy belated birthday to Christian. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Christian, how old did you turn, man?
There's this, I think it's in Plutarch's lives.
Oh my gosh. Of course he could have just said, I turned 32. It's like, there's a thing in Plutarch. Go ahead. What did Plutarch say?
There's this biography of Julius Caesar. I believe it's Plutarch, where he's recounting Julius Caesar's life. And near the beginning of it, there's this scene where I believe he's stationed in Hispania, and he's in some town somewhere, and he sees a statue of Alexander the Great, and and it's his birthday, and he starts crying, and his friends are asking him like, why are you so upset? It's your birthday. Let's go to the tavern and go drink or something. And Julius Caesar said, I've turned the same age that Alexander was when he died, and I haven't accomplished anything in my life. And that's me currently.
Oh my God. Okay.
I am now the same age that Alexander was when he passed away.
So 30,
I did not,
3.
32.
32.
And Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, and here we are currently fighting the Iranians.
The Persians. Yeah.
I'm not leading the campaign. I'm not marching on Tehran right now.
Ctesiphon is not yours. Oh man. Well, Christian, happy birthday. And by the way, for everybody that is buying into Christian's black pill, I haven't accomplished anything. He's actually accomplished quite a bit. He's got a nice home. He's got a Tesla, ladies. I'm telling you. And he's got a.
So funny, Nick.
He's got a good career.
on X, all the time, like it's X, right? So once you have a large enough account, you can post anything. You can post the most benign thing imaginable, and you'll get haters in the comments. Well, there's a group of like, the typical people that don't like you. The James Lindsays. There's a few other people.
Yeah, James doesn't like you much.
And so I'll post stuff every now and then. And these guys, they're typically in the like kind of not really libertarian, but they're like in this like classical liberal camp. They don't like me for obvious reasons, and they'll come and be like, you're just a unemployed dude living in his mother's basement, and it's just so funny, like seeing people who don't know anything about my life. Like, I own my own house. I don't brag on.
And he's got a nice car too. I mean,
I don't go out of my way on Twitter, in large part because I think that myself is actually kind of like the least interesting thing about my Twitter account. I use Twitter to talk about like ideas and philosophy and economics. I don't really use Twitter to brag about myself. And so I see these people that are like, you're unemployed, living in your mother's basement. And like, it's like,
there's none of those things.
But I never bother to like correct them on Twitter because it's like, who cares? Right. You know, you're always going to have haters no matter what.
Well, Christian, speaking of you not being unemployed, you have also recently started your own channel, and its first video right out the gate, like over 50,000 views, probably over 60 at this point. Tell everyone where they can find your channel.
So feel free to like, I guess just look up my name. My last name's kind of hard to spell, Heiens.
Yeah.
Weird way to spell Hines, but yeah, if you just look up Christian Hines, you'll see the channel that I just started, and it's only got one video so far. I need to work on the second one. Yeah. But the topic, we said it at the start of this podcast, it was Freerin and the politics of deception. And
yeah,
it was got a lot of views.
We did a whole review. We did a whole review on our episode. And again, Christian, not only is Christian starting his own channel, but he's still helping and co-hosting on this one as well. By the way, one more time, the Man Book. That's right. I actually wrote a book. If you want to get the book that John Lovell described as the worst coloring book ever, you can get it now. There's some pretty cool stuff in here. Some stuff I learned serving in a legislature, serving in the military, being a husband, being a father. If you ever had questions on what's the difference between raising daughters and sons, or if you've ever had questions on what's the proper way to prepare a steak, or maybe you wanted to know what's the proper way to kick in a door or hotwire a car, it's all in this book. All the stuff that men should learn how to do. You can go check that out. It's right now. It is a pre-order anywhere, but yeah, go check that out. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. Had a great time. Thank you very much for Christian. Happy belated birthday to Christian as well. Thank you to producer Nate, as always, for managing all of the questions. If we didn't get to a question and you're mad about it, it's producer Nate. It's all his fault. Send him angry message. Once again, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next episode.